Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. I do a lot of art-based content. I'm 22, and this week I have a hair tutorial for you guys. Requested by Love Yourself here, one of my subscribers. And first I want to start off with straight hair. It's the most basic hair to start off with. It's probably the easiest one to start. So let's get started. With straight hair, I like to put an emphasis on it making it look very fluid. I know when you think straight, you think stiff and not hard to, I don't know, stiff and like pretty straight at the ends. With my straight hair, I like to make it at least come to a point and make it actually look like a lock of hair. So that's what I do with straight hair. I try to make it look as fluid as possible, and just try to use straight lines, and not straight lines, but more fluid lines, more lines with curves and stuff like that. And I like to make also the hair look like it's on the person. I know sometimes hair could look like it's just an add-on. I like to make it seem like it's a part of the person by making it like go over her shoulder or go over her neck, or it dips in when it touches her shoulder and then it comes off the back, things like that. I like making hair fluid. That's the key word of this whole drawing hair tutorial. So yeah. When drawing hair, I start off from the part first, and then I go off on each side, drawing from the reference photo if I'm using it, or from the hairstyle that I have in my mind. So her part starts on the left, more on the left side of her head. So I start off with the right side, trying to make sure it just balances out. It looks good. It looks fluid. It looks similar to what's in the reference photo. And yeah, I go from there. I basically just draw what I see on the reference. That's how drawing hair should be. It's not that hard, although I know it could seem very intimidating when you're starting off. For the coloring portion, I just go in, color with the base coat of my color. Oh, and by the way, I'm using brushes, dry ink in the inking section, and gouache brush in the painting section. Those are the only two I use. But I showed you guys really quickly, like how not to draw hair, like how I was talking about, like making it look stiff, like it's like a really bad weave or something. You don't want that. So yeah, make the ends look like they come to a point, make them look fluid. You don't have to do draw like every strand of hair, because that gets a little intense unless their style is more realistic. But yeah, you don't have to do all that. Just make it come to big chunky points, and yeah. Then I go in with a darker tone of that base color and use my gouache brush just to get a good chunk, or block in the shadows that I see in the hair from the light source. The light source is coming from the top left, so I'm trying to make sure the shadows reflect that. I'm just trying to block them in and stuff like that. And get a good, and I'm trying to make it look like she's a 3D person, so I try to do the shadows on the sides of the hair where the light won't touch as much also, and then things like that. Having a good idea of how shading around in art school you learn how to shade around a sphere and where light hits is good to have for almost everything that you do, especially in drawing, especially if you want your art to look like it's a more 3D kind of thing, like how I do more semi-realistic style. So that I really need shadows and highlights and knowledge of knowing how to color on a 3D space. After I've gotten all the shadows blocked in, I like to go in with my dry ink brush in a more darker blue or darker purplish tone, and I draw strands of hair. Now this is like very tedious. You don't have to do it how I do it here. I usually put in more strands of hair closer together towards the ears. It's supposed to be the darkest, and then they more spread out, like how I show you on the lock of hair I'm drawing. How I do it, the closest to the highlight, I try to make it with less strands of hair drawn in. So that's basically what I do around the whole entire head or hair. So yeah, you don't have to do this. You could use a thicker brush to just get in the basic strand and basic shadows of the hair, or you can use thinner if you want more realistic, or as much as you want, as much detail as you want to add in, you could go for it. It all depends on your art style. And yeah, but this is how I do it. So it's a little more tedious, but I like the look of how it comes out. And so yeah, and then usually after that I go and I change the opacity if it's a little too harsh for me, usually, or I could keep it the same if the that if it looks good together. For highlight, I usually go in with a white and use my dry ink brush again, draw lines where the light source is hitting. Then I use the Gaussian blur in the effects area and I blur it out. Then I erase like dips into the hair in the highlight area and make it look more like an anime style of highlight. And yeah, and then I'll duplicate that layer and I turn them all both onto a soft light effect for the layer or overlay, and it gives it that really anime vibe that I like. So and yeah, and then usually if I want, because I love highlights, I go back in and I draw lines where the light touches the edges of the hair the most. And yeah, that's my favorite part, and you guys know I love highlights. So. Next is wavy hair. So wavy hair differs in the way I color it because it has a lot more shadows and it takes a little bit more time to color in and shadow and highlight because they have more highlight points, more shadow points because of the dips in the hair and because it's wavy. So I show you guys with a lock of hair first of how I do it. The hair that dips in, the part of the hair that dips in is more darker usually than the part that sticks out to the light, and so that's what I try to replicate when I'm drawing this lock of hair here. That's what I'm going to use as a reference for when I shadow with the blue, the dark blue and the dark purple. I usually like to do, or I, when I'm, yeah, basically that, and then it helps with guiding where my highlight should be and things like that. Just like how I did this straight here, I start off from the part in the middle of her hair first, right, just like the reference, and then I go off on each side, basically getting in the parts that block in the hair. With curly hair, I try to give a little curl, or not curly hair, but curlier hair or wavy hair. I try to give a little more flip at the ends to signify, you know, it's a curly or more wavier texture in here. So yeah, I try to, it's good to, you don't have to draw like every strand like I was saying, unless that's your style, but I try to block in from the reference photo basically what I think are the most important parts that stand out and what are the parts I need to draw. So I just give a basic block in of the locks of hair, and I just curl them at the ends, and it gives a nice look to the hair and makes it look like how it's supposed to, wavy, especially for this one, wavy, and yeah, that kind of texture here. I go in and start coloring the base color like last time, and then I start off with the shadows, blocking them in with a darker tone of that color, which was like a reddish pinkish color. And yeah, the light source on this one comes from the top right, so everything shadow base is mostly going to be on the opposite side or in the inside of the right side of her head. Like I told you earlier, most of the shadows are going to be in the dips of the hair, and then the highlights are going to come out the top parts of the hair that stick out the most, and that's what makes it also give that wavy look effect also, and it just adds on to the texture of the hair. Now for the more tedious part, which is even longer to do, believe it or not, when you're doing curlier or wavier hair. So I go in with the darker purple or red, blue color, whichever I'm using. It always depends differently. Sometimes I select a more bluer color, sometimes I select a more purplish color. And then I go into where the shadows are and make the strands of hair closer together. And then I spread out the strands when it comes to closer to the highlighted part of the hair, or the part that's supposed to be the highlighted part of the hair, and it just gives this really nice effect of looking like actual hair. But yeah, and then I also do little lines of here too on the highlight part, just to get more detail. But because it has the highlight, you don't want it to add too much detail to that area, because you don't want it to look too busy. That's of course where the highlight's supposed to be. So try not to put too dark of a stroke on those the highlight areas, but I do like light lines of just to emphasize that this part is also, you know, with hair too, and it gives a nice look too. Then for this one, I do lower the opacity on it because it is a little darker for the hair color. And then I go in with the highlight, drawing lines on each of the highlighted areas or points of the hair, and Gaussian blur that out, and then draw or erase dips of from in those highlight areas to replicate the anime style I was talking about earlier. It's basically a repeat of everything from the straight hair. Everything is the way I draw here is basically the same format, just applied differently to different types of hair textures when I draw them. The most different one will be when I draw the coilies or the coiled style hair or afro style hair. If you wanted to, you could also just leave this highlight as it is. You wouldn't have to like change it in the layer effects to like an overlay or soft light if you didn't want to, because the white also looks nice too. And if you just want to, you could lower the opacity a little bit if it's too harsh. But I like the way that the layer effects make it blend in more with the hair and things like that, so that's why I usually do it. But if you're going for a more shinier type of hair, you could always just leave it as a white color and use it as a normal layer effect. Now for curly hair. On the right side of the girl, I show you how I draw curly hair. And yeah, I color just like how I did with the wavy hair, but there's more shadows and more highlights because there's more curls in the hair and more dips and bends in the hair than in a wavy hair. So I start off with the part like usual, and I draw basically what I see. And I told you guys to keep fluid lines. Don't keep your hand too stiff when you're drawing the outline for the hair. Make it look as natural as possible, if that's your style. Unless you have like a style that makes everything look more blocky, or it just depends, you know. But for me, I have a more fluid style. I have a more semi-realistic style. I try to go as fluid and light on the hair as possible to give it a more natural look. So still ending each lock that I draw, blocking the locks, and then ending the locks in with a curl at the end to give emphasis that this is curly hair, and this hair is, you know, supposed to have like, you know, big chunks of curls. It is textured. My favorite part of drawing hair, especially when it's parted on one side or just on any side, drawing that big like bang area and just drawing that big hump to make it have like this dramatic bang. That's my favorite part, and so I did that. I always like to start off with that part first if I'm drawing that, if it has that hair still has a bang, and I go off from there, just remembering to keep fluid lines, and every lock with a curl at the end, things like that. This here is important when I start trying to mess around with the curls, is just to maybe to keep the curls not looking too uniform, make them look a little different. That also helps with not making it look too boring or uninteresting to look at. So I try to make it bigger at the top of the curl and then looser or more tighter at the end. Then again, base color for this hair, then I go in with the shadows. The highlight area, or where the light source is on the top right, or not the top right, it's coming straight out of her face and it's coming from the right of her head. And yeah, that is where I start off with the shadows, going in and doing the hair strands again. I love doing it on this hair. It just always adds a different depth to the hair, especially on curlier hairs. It just makes it look so much more interesting. Highlight, of course, same thing here with the line, white line, and then Gaussian blur, erasing the parts that you want out, and then leaving it in, changing the layer effect, drawing in more lines for the highlight where the light source touches, and just adding more emphasis in that area, going in with a lighter tone of that base color, and just using a gouache brush just to go broadly show where the highlight should be. Coils are now a little bit more detailed. Like I told you guys, the curlier the hair, the more detailed it gets. I show you guys how to draw coils on a coil on the right side of her head, far right. But that is what it's supposed to look like. I don't draw each hair strand like that. If you guys could tell, I draw everything like as a little line, just to shape out, this is supposed to be a very not rigid, but a very bumpy area. The hair is very fluffy, and it's supposed to look like that. Very poofy and very voluptuous. So I use little hand markings or little streaks of hair, strokes of hair, to indicate, the fluffiness of the hair and things like that. Then I go in and I just brush. I do a base coat. Doing coily hair is just a lot harder than any other type of hair. It just is a lot more detailed. It's as detailed as you could possibly get, other than from braids. I do the shadows in the areas where they are needed the most. The light source coming from the bottom part, her head, from where her chin is up. So the light source everything else should be in shadow. And I just block it in really quickly. Then for when I do the darker blue, darker purple ear shadows, I used the gouache brush, but I used it in a smaller, I used the dry ink brush, but I used it as a smaller brush stroke. So I did them like dots, and I just, not really like dots, but like haphazard dots, and I tried to drag them out a little bit to the hair. I don't know how to explain it, but if you just look at how I did the brush strokes, they're different. I apply that same technique to the highlight, and I do put highlight where it's supposed to be highlighted in here, and I added a little bit to the shadow areas too, because with afros, it's like not just one cut and done. It's very it's poofy, so each thing is, if it's touching the hair, light source, it's going to have a little bit of light on it. So I apply that. I bring that down in opacity, and then I do what I do with the light source in the anime style hairs, but I just do a more bumpier line instead of just a straight line. And then I just change the light source of it to soft light, and that is it. And then I bring down the opacity. And that is it for the hair tutorial. That is basically how I draw my main types of hair, other than braids and locks. If you guys want a detailed video on that, like I said, let me know in the comments. I didn't know if to add that in or not. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for 830 now subscribers. I love you guys. Stay safe, and I will talk to you guys in the next week's video. There might be 2 videos next week. I don't know, maybe. But bye guys.
Baby, don't worry. Go and get some sleep. Why you always in a hurry? You got bigger things planned for you. Don't worry. You ain't gotta come to conclusions this early. Don't worry, baby, don't worry. Go and get some sleep. Why you always in a hurry? You got bigger things planned for you. Don't worry. You ain't gotta come to conclusions this early. I'm worried about my father's health. I'm worried about being by myself. I'm worried I ain't doing